Hello Bio 2, this is Mr. B here, and we are starting in on our next chapter, chapter 22, and this chapter focuses on plants. So the title of section 1 is Introduction to Plants. So before we get started, we're just going to simply ask ourselves, what is a plant? And how we define it, a plant, is as they are multicellular eukaryotes that have cell walls made of cellulose. So this is a difference between them and the fungi that we talked about. The fungi were chitin, and now these are cellulose. And plants develop from multicellular embryos, we'll get into their life cycle in a second, and they carry out photosynthesis using the green pigments chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. So that's just some general characteristic. And some examples, plants include trees, shrubs, grasses, as well as other organisms such as mosses and ferns. And most plants are autotrophs, which mean they have to make their own food, although there are a few that are parasites or saprobes, which we said were decomposers that live on decaying materials. And also there's some others that are carnivorous as well. If you remember the Venus flytrap, if you've ever heard of that, is a plant that actually has to get its nutrients from living things. So that could be technically classified as a parasite or a saprobe, but not exactly sure on that one. So they're not all autotrophs. Most of them are, but not all. Okay, and I mentioned their life cycle. So their life cycles have two alternating phases, a diploid, which means they have two sets of chromosomes, phase, and a haploid phase where they only have one set of chromosomes, and this is known as alternation of generations. So whenever you see 2N, 2N just refers to the number of chromosomes that they have in the cell. So 2N means they have two chromosomes, N means they have one. I don't know why they use the letter N, it's just what they choose to use. So looking at alternation of generation. So in this chart, there's really no place to start because it is a cycle, life cycle, it's always continuous. So we'll just start right here where it says spores. So when spores are produced, they are, you see they're N, they are haploid. So these spores produce their own plant. Sometimes, and again, this is a whole plant, and it's called a gametophyte. So these spores produce an entire plant, and you notice it is still still haploid, excuse me. So this haploid plant produces sperms, which are haploid. It produces eggs, which are haploid. Sometimes this is done in the same plant, sometimes this is done as different plants. So these sperm and these eggs, they come together, then all of a sudden this N plus N is going to give us two N's, and it's a sporophyte plant. So the sporophyte plant lives, and this is most case what we're going to see in our plants is they're in the sporophyte phase, and then as it circles around, these sporophytes are going to produce spores and start the cycle over again. So we'll see multiple examples of how this works, so just keep that in the back of your mind, and just know that we will see examples, but alternation of generations is how they produce. Okay, so this kind of again breaks it down again. So during the two phases of the life cycle, mitosis and meiosis alternate the cells to produce the two types of reproductive cells, gametes and spores. The diploid or 2N phase is called the sporophyte or spore-producing plant, and the haploid phase is called the gametophyte or the gamete-producing plant. So it's almost kind of backwards. The sporophyte, which produces the spores, is the 2N, and then the haploid is called the gametophyte, which is producing gametes, which are going to be diploid. So we'll get these all straightened out. If you're confused, again, write down any questions that you have. And then plant spores are haploid. Reproductive cells form in the sporophyte by meiosis. The spores can grow into new organisms called gametophytes. A gamete is a reproductive cell produced by mitosis, and it can fuse with another gamete to produce the sporophyte. So I think I went over all that. This is just, we have it in picture form right here and word form right here. So whichever works best for you, you can look at that. And so now, since we have a little background information about plants, we're going to need to know what they need to survive. So all plants have to have four things to survive. They must have sunlight, they must have water and minerals, they must have some form of gas exchange, and they must be able to transport water and nutrients throughout their plant body. So getting into these each one of these a little more specific, plants use energy from sunlight to carry out photosynthesis, and photosynthetic organisms such as leaves are broad and flat to maximize light absorption. So the reason leaves are shaped the way they are, I'm sure most of us have seen a plant leaf before, they're broad and flat, and that is because they can absorb the most amount of sunlight like that, and again produce energy there. So that is the first one, sunlight. So water and minerals. All cells inside the plant require a constant supply of water. Water is used up quickly when the sun is shining. As a result, plants have structures that limit water loss. And I'm sure we'll get into more of those, we'll get into those more specifically once we talk more about the plant. But I think you guys all know if you've raised a plant before, you always have to water it. And that's because their cells need water to constantly need water to survive. And then as they absorb water, they also absorb minerals. The minerals are just the nutrients in the soil needed for plant growth. So that's waters and mineral. The next one is gas exchange. Plants require oxygen to support cellular respiration, as well as carbon dioxide to carry out photosynthesis. So as you know, we breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide, they breathe out oxygen. So we kind of live hand in hand with plants there, and they must exchange these gases with the atmosphere without losing excessive amounts of water through evaporation. Again, there's those specialized structures that we will talk about. And then movement of water and nutrients. Plants take up water and minerals through their roots, but they make food in their leaves. Again, that's the chloroplast. That's where photosynthesis occurs. That's their food. Then most plants have specialized tissues that carry water and nutrients from the soil and distribute products of photosynthesis throughout the plant body. So that again, most plants, so that's going to apply to almost all the ones we talk about. And simpler plants carry out these functions by diffusion. This is a word that should be going back to biology 1 there, but if we don't know that, diffusion is just moving across a membrane, or again moving from the cell. The membrane would be this from the ground into the cells. So that is our first part of section 1. Let me know if you have any questions.